Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 2nd of February of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the Sudzha direction where the Russians continue their offensive operation. And as for the 2nd of February, the most important updates are coming not from the territory of Sudzha itself, not from the long line of combat contact. The most important updates are coming from the road N07. As you can see, we have added additional icon, we have added additional area, and we have two icons, and all these things all together means that the Russians established complete fire control over the road N07 between the settlement of Sumy and the settlement of Sudzha. Let's take a look at this video. In this video we can see how the Russians were FPV droning, attacking, bombing the Ukrainian vehicles, units, tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, personnel carriers along N07 road. Summarizing everything, N07 road is the most important road that the Ukrainians have in this area. This is a living road. This is the road that Ukrainians use to supply and support their forces in Sudzha. This is the road that Ukrainians are using for evacuation purposes. So this is the most important arteria. And now, summarizing everything, as a result of 2 days of FPV drone strikes, we can make a conclusion that the main arteria of the armored forces of Ukraine in the Sudzha direction was cut by the Russians. So in this video, as you can see, lots of strikes. As for now, we still see lots of Ukrainian vehicles, which means that Ukrainians were not ready for this situation, that Ukrainians, soldiers, drivers, these different equipment didn't expect that the Russians are able to establish complete control over this territory. Let's take a look at the situation on the 1st of February, and let's take a look at the video that was published yesterday. In this video, we can see the same situation. Lots of Ukrainian vehicles, checkpoints, lots of cars, lots of trucks, lots of different equipment that is moving from one side or to another, and everything is under complete Russian fire control. This is basically the beginning of the end. The most important, the Ukrainians didn't expect. The second important thing, the Russians are using a fiber optic drones, and which the Ukrainians don't have any solution how to destroy them or to bring them down. If the situation continues the same way, if tomorrow or the day after tomorrow and the next days we're going to see the same picture from the road N07, this will mean that Ukrainians will be forced to make two things. First thing, the Ukrainians will be forced to begin counter-offensive operation in the direction of the settlement of Kulbaki, and the main purpose of this counter-attack is to increase the territories under complete control along the border and to force the Russians to fall back, because, for example, from these lines the Russians will not have the same possibilities to attack this main road. But obviously this is exactly what the Russians are expecting for, because now the Russians don't need to be in a hurry in the entire Sudzha direction, because if the Russians continue attacking Ukrainian vehicles in this part of N07 road, that means that in a month Ukrainians will lose maybe even several hundreds of vehicles, significant number of servicemen, and many other different things. And now, during the period when the United States of America cancel any help to Ukraine, this is something like a part of a very big disaster of the armed forces of Ukraine. So let's wait and see. And once again, for better understanding, let's add this road. Once again, this is the city of Sudzha that is under complete Ukraine control, and this is the road we are talking about, and this is the region where the Russians established complete fire control in the village of Khotin. So the Russians cut this road. Ukrainians have no chances to go through this territory without losses. Of course, this is not the only road that Ukrainians can use to supply and support their forces. Another way how the Ukrainians can do this, they can move through the settlement of Velika Chernishina, then through the forest in the direction of Magritsa, and then from the settlement of Magritsa to the same N07 road to the settlement of Krapivnisha, and then from this area in the direction of the city of Sudzha. But when talking about this road, of course, we see that it's much longer, obviously, and this road goes through the road and through the roads that have very poor quality. So it's just local roads roads that haven't been maintained probably since the USSR collapse and something like this. And anyway, even if the Ukrainians begin using this blue line for supplying and supporting their forces in the Sudzha direction, it doesn't mean that the Russians will not establish another FPV drone control area, let's say over the settlement of Vunakievka. So as I see, the Russians don't have problem with this. The only solution, 100% solution for the Ukrainians, is to counterattack in the direction of Kulbakin to force the Russians to fall back. But this is exactly what the Russians are expecting. And if Ukrainians begin this counterattack, most likely and obviously the Ukrainians would be completely defeated. Now let's discuss the situation in the Sudzha area itself. The Russians continue their offensive operation. During the previous 24 hours, we got few more videos of how the Russians were FPV droning the Ukrainian positions and vehicles using fiber optic drones. You know that these fiber optic drones are the game changers. You know that the Russians probably for the previous 2-3 months, since the beginning of the usage of this drone, they published maybe already thousands of videos, thousands of episodes of how they were attacking and destroying Ukrainian vehicles. And if you ask my opinion, how many videos were published from the Ukrainian side? Maybe 5. Maybe 5 videos were published from the Ukrainian side how they were using the same fiber optic drone. And this is the biggest question: what is the problem? What is the problem? Why the Ukrainians are not implementing this technology in their forces? And because this is the turning point technology, and this is the technology that will change the game, you know, that, and we see the consequences already on the ground in the Sudzha direction, in the Pokrovsk direction, and in many other directions we're going to see in the very near future. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the northern Kupiansk direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. As you can see from this area, we haven't received lots of icons, just icons with flags, which means that the Russians managed to improve their positions according to different sources, more or less reliable sources, for example, pro-Russian resources and neutral resources, and once again pro-Russian resources reported that the Russians managed to improve their positions in this area and just to take several forests, several roads under control. So as you can see, the Russians are not in a rush. They are trying to maintain the lines, to bring additional forces. Probably during the next several days the Russians will continue this process, and only in a week or in 2 weeks the Russians will begin their full-scale offensive operation with the purpose to defeat the Ukrainians in this area completely. Very interesting video we got from the settlement of Kolodezny. Probably for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation we got something from this area. So what can we see here? In this video we can see the Ukrainian howitzer crop of the Polish production, and we see that the Russians, as a result of FPV drone attack, destroyed this howitzer. This is very important video, and there are few important things that I would like to discuss with you. The first one is the distance of the howitzer. So let's take a calculation. So this is the position that Ukrainian howitzer was destroyed, and this is the nearest position of the armored forces of Ukraine, of Russian Federation, along the river Voskol, and the distance here is more than 12 kilometers. And once again, when talking about this video, the Russians destroyed this vehicle not without using fiber optic drone. The Russians in this case were using just a regular drone. So as you can see, even this type of drone can go through significant territories and destroy Ukrainian positions in the deep rear. We don't see such technologies from the Ukrainian side, by the way. Now let's move further. Let's discuss the situation in the Liman direction. As you can see, during the previous 24 hours we got a lot of videos. The Russians, it seems, began artillery preparation. They were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions, the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine, their strongholds, and it seems that the Russians are getting ready before the beginning of another offensive operation. I'll remind you that as for now the Russians have several footholds on the Ukrainian side of the river of Zherebets. One foothold the Russians have in the area of the village of Ivanovka, and the second foothold the Russians have in the vicinity of the village of Makievka. So summarizing everything, and based on the geography and the coordinates of artillery strikes, we can make a conclusion that the Russians may try to attack the Ukrainian positions using two routes of attacks with the purpose to take under control the settlement by the name of Redkadub. If the Russians are able to establish complete control over the settlement, this is going to be something like flank, secured flank, northern flank, and this will allow the Russians in the end to begin advancing in the southern direction with the purpose to begin the third battle for the settlement of Liman. So very interesting things we are expecting in the very near future from this front line. Now let's discuss the situation probably in the most important area, and we are going to talk about the battle for Siverks. I'll remind you that since the beginning of the special military operation, maybe the Russians carried out tens, dozens of attempts to attack in the western direction, but most of those attacks failed. The Russians were defeated, suffered significant losses, and many other negative things about the Russian attempts to attack. But the late 2024 and early 2025 most likely is the period of turning point. Now the situation begins developing in the completely different situation, different direction. The Russians almost every single week or 2 weeks publish another video that allow us to think that the Russians are improving their positions and began moving. And the most important event, I'll remind you, took place several days ago on the 29th of January, on the 30th of January 2025. The Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt and to enter the most eastern part of the settlement of Verkhnykamensk, and that was exactly a turning point in the battle for Siverks. Let's take a look at this video once again, and in this video we can see how the Russians, using most armored turtle tank ever since the beginning of the special military operation, were advancing in the direction of Verkhnykamensk. The Ukrainians were bombing the Russians, FPV droning them. The Ukrainians were doing everything they can, but just one tank managed to cross all these territories and without any damage to reach the village to land infantry, and infantry managed to secure the eastern part, and that was the turning point. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map in this area, we have adjusted the breakthrough area, and today on the 2nd of February of 2025 we start receiving more and more videos from the eastern Siverks direction. The Ukrainian sources published the video, very long one, 2 and 30 seconds around video of the situation on the ground. We will not watch this video due to significant number of casualties and losses and many other things, but according to this video, the Russians during the previous several days managed to take under complete control the eastern part of Verkhnykamensk, and the most important, the Russians began their full-scale offensive operation in the direction of the southwestern part of Belogorovka, and as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to enter this forest, and this forest is the biggest and one of the most powerful stronghold in the entire Siverks direction. And now we have lots of proofs that most likely the defense of this stronghold collapsed and the Russians took control over this territory. If the Russians are able to dig in deeper to repel upcoming Ukrainian counterattacks, then most likely everything between let's say to the west, to the east of this red line would collapse automatically, and the Ukrainians sooner or later, more precisely the forces of the 81st Air Mobile Brigade, would be forced to retreat in the western directions towards the settlement of Serebryanka. So the turning point in this area has come, obviously, and now it's just a matter of time, maybe days, maybe weeks, when the Russians will get the outskirts of Siversk and the final battle for this stronghold begins. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the city of Chavar, where, according to different resources, more neutral resources and pro-Russian resources, as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to improve their positions a little bit in the southern part. Furthermore, I would like to tell you that right before I start making this video, we got the geolocation from this part, from this area, how the Russian vehicle was moving along this road in the direction of the city of Chavar, and how the Ukrainians were destroying and attacking this vehicle. And based on this video, we just haven't managed to add this icon to map because it was time to begin making the video. But anyway, tomorrow we will adjust, by the next video we'll adjust the video, of course, adjust the map. So summarizing everything according to this geolocation, most likely tomorrow before the next update we will adjust everything in the forest, in the micro district of Novy, and additional territories in Russian favor. So which means that the Russian Russians are very, very close to finish the battle for this city as well. Now let's discuss the situation in the city of Toretsk. Most likely several days ago the Russians finished the battle for the northern part of Siverks, despite the fact that we haven't received any report that can confirm this. Neither the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation confirmed this, neither the Russian sources on the ground published videos of how they managed to restore control over the northern facilities. We believe that the city of Toretsk has fallen, and after that, when the battle for the northern Toretsk has ended, the Russians regrouped their forces and they brought them to the pocket between the city of Toretsk and the city Nilipovka and Novospassky and Sherbinovka. If you remember, 3 days ago, there was a very huge and big pocket exactly in this area. This is the situation, for example, by the end of the 30th of January. There were lots of strongholds under Ukraine control. The eastern part of the village of Sherbenovka was under complete Ukraine control. And somewhere on the 30th of January, the Russians began their final offensive operation in this area with the purpose to cut this pocket. And now more and more sources, more and more proofs are saying says that most likely this pocket was cut by the Russians completely. At least this information was provided us today by neutral resources. They have some proof, some information that the pocket was abandoned by the Ukrainians completely, and then the most of Ukrainian soldiers managed to break through and to get the villages of Katerinovka and the northern part of Sherbinovka, and that the pocket was cut. This is very important because now the Russians will continue and will regroup once again, and after this regrouping, the Russians will begin their major offensive operation in the direction of the Kliban-Bytsky water reservoir. We are talking about this water reservoir, and this will allow the Russians to begin another offensive operation or to continue another offensive operation in full strength with the purpose to cut this pocket, to encircle the Ukrainians and to begin advancing in the direction of Konstantinovka. Obviously, this year we are going to see a lot of updates from this area. Zelensky says that he is ready to begin negotiation process as close as never since the beginning of the special military operation, but I'm not sure that he is ready to accept every single Russian demand. Most likely he will fight till the last, but when he loses, he will accept even more demands from the Russian side. As for the N32 road direction, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their position significantly. This information was provided us both by pro-Ukrainian, neutral and pro-Russian resources. According to information we have, the armed forces of Russian Federation entered these facilities on the territory of the settlement of Vadiane Druge. So the Russians are advancing, and the same thing, the Russian main purpose is to move along N32 road and to get Kliban-Bytsky water reservoir from the west and from the southwest. So if we add some lines, this is the primary target of the armed forces of Russian Federation in this side. So from one side they're advancing from the city of Toretsk, from this side the Russians are planning to advance from the settlement of Vozdvizhenka, and this is, and most likely we are going to see this operation during the late late winter and early spring, and most likely by the beginning of the summer the battle for Konstantinovka will begin. As for the Pokrovsk direction, according to information we have, there are very heavy clashes on the territory between the settlements of Udachne and Kotlina. Furthermore, different resources reported that Ukrainians, as a result of counter-offensive, managed to restore control over some facilities between these two settlements of Kotlina and Udachne. The Russians are saying that the armed forces of Russian Federation managed to improve their positions along the railways between the settlement of Kotlina and the city of Pokrovsk. As for now, nobody, neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians, published any proofs that can confirm this progress on the ground. A bit further in the southern direction, according to information we have, the Russians managed to take under control over the 50% of the settlement of Uspenovka. The clashes continue. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians, after the fall of Novoandreevka, managed to enter the southern part of the settlement of Sribne. Currently, there are very heavy clashes in the central part for the facilities, farms, and most likely for the territory of the school. If Ukrainians lose this battle, they will be forced to fall back in the western directions towards the settlement of Zaporozhye. As for now, there are very heavy clashes. The Andreevka fortified area direction, during the previous 24 hours, we got lots of important updates. The most important is that now the Russians are trying to improve their positions from the northeastern part of Andreevka, trying to improve their positions to get the river of Vovke and Orlova from the south, trying to take the eastern part of the settlement completely. The Russians are trying to improve their positions in the northern part by entering these farms and taking them under control. And of course, the Russians are trying to move along the river of Orekhova. So summarizing everything, the primary target of the armed force of Russian Federation for the next several days is to take under complete control everything that is located inside of this red line. As for now, they are doing this. This information was confirmed both by pro-Ukrainian sources, by pro-Russian resources, once again by pro-Russian resources, and by different neutral resources. So we see that the news is tightening around the Ukrainian positions in this area. The Ukrainian soldiers are trying to get as close as possible to the main evacuation roads, but during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to discover a lot of engineering equipment in the vicinity of the river of Vovcha. The Ukrainians were trying to build not a pontoon bridge, they were trying to bring sand. You know that pontoon bridge are very unstable technology when the pontoon bridges are being established very close to the line of combat contact, because just regular artillery, you can destroy it. So that's why the Ukrainians changed their tactics, and they decided, after probably tens or dozens of bridges were destroyed, they decided to bring sand and to create some surface, some land through the river. Because when talking about this technology, this is much more powerful technology, much more reliable technology. But the Russians, of course, they knew that Ukrainians most likely would do something like this. So that's why they established complete FPV drone control with this territory, with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainian engineer forces to bring sand to this area. And when the Russians discovered this engineering equipment, they began bombing and attacking them. So the Russians are doing everything they can with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainians to create evacuation roads for those Ukrainian soldiers that stuck on the territory of Ulakli, and those Ukrainians that completely stuck in the vicinity of Dachne, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. During the previous 24 hours, we got more videos of how the Russians were bombing and attacking the main evacuation points of the armed forces of Ukraine in the most western part of the settlement. There are very heavy clashes, and telling the truth, I have some doubts whether the Ukrainians from the territory of Dachne and these fields are able to escape this Cauldron. Most likely they will be abandoned by the Ukrainian commanders. From the other side, the Russians began preparation before further offensive operation in the direction of the settlements of Odradne, in the direction of the settlement of Bogatyr, and in the direction of the settlement by the name of Rozliv. During the previous 24 hours, we got a lot of important updates. As for the village of Rozliv, today we got a lot of videos of how the Russians continue the bombing of the settlement with FABs. Temporary deployment points, machine gun positions, FPV drone positions were destroyed by the Russian artillery and aviation fire. Furthermore, according to information we have, as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to secure the company's stronghold to the west of Razdolne. If this information is correct, then the Russians have no problems to advance further, and this stronghold can be used by the Russians as a very important base before further offensive operation. You know that the situation for the Ukrainians is very difficult for many reasons, and another reason is more and more water barriers that goes in the northwestern direction. For example, this is another pocket that most likely the Russians will try to create for the armored forces of Ukraine when they finish with this situation. As for the Zaporozhye direction, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything, just a regular military activity. And that's it for today. Military summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.